Good evening, everyone. We will get underway with tonight's proceedings. I'm Brendan McGrath, the Chief Executive Officer. I will be chairing the first part of tonight's proceedings up until and including the election of a mayor, which we'll get to fairly shortly. So welcome, thank you for attending. Just letting you all know that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed to our YouTube channel to improve access to the meeting for our community. The recording will be published and retained in accordance with our legal obligations, and as a visitor in the public gallery, your presence may be recorded. I'll move on now to the acknowledgement of traditional owners, and I'll ask Councillor Dave to carry that out.
Thank you, Mr. CEO, and I'll ask everyone to stand for the acknowledgement of country, please. Audio-wise, is that okay? I'm short. I acknowledge that we are hosting this meeting from the lands of the Bangarang people. I acknowledge that the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we all work today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders of the people participating in this meeting. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Victoria.
Councillor Russell, would you like to do the opening prayer?
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Almighty God, we humbly ask Thee to bless and guide this council into deliberations so that we may truly preserve the welfare of the people whom we serve. Amen.
Thank you. All councillors are present. Our Director of Development Services, Stephen Swart, is on leave, and we have Celeste Brockwell up the front here, standing in Stephen's place. There are no apologies or granting of leaves of absence, but I will hand over to Councillor Herry.
Thank you, Brendan. So I'm not requesting a formal leave of absence, not at all, but I'm very pleased to be announcing that my family, myself and our not-so-baby daughter anymore, Poppy, will be heading overseas to visit the extended family at the end of the week. So I just want to let everyone know that while I may be remote in my future attendance, I will definitely be completing and delivering on all of my responsibilities in my role as councillor, attending briefings, and I'll be in attendance for the December meeting also. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Herry. There is no citizenship ceremony, item 6. Item 7, confirmation of minutes. Can I have someone move the confirmation of the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the 26th of October? Councillor Benton and Councillor Dave, thank you. All those in favour? Carried. Item 8, conflicts of interest. Are there any conflicts of interest anyone needs to declare? I will be declaring a conflict of interest, a material conflict of interest in item 13.7, which deals with the CEO employment policy, and that deals directly with CEO employment matters, so clearly I have an interest in that matter. Item 9, there are no petitions. Item 10, there are no deputations. Item 11, we don't have any councillor reports this evening. Item 12, executive services. There are no items in executive services, so we'll move on to item 13, corporate services, starting with item 13.1, determination of the term of mayor. Sarah Brindley.
Thanks, Brendan. So there are 4 reports as part of the council meeting that the Local Government Act requires us to address with council this evening. I'll just run through what those 4 reports are and then we can go through each one. So the first one is for council to determine the term of the next mayor, so that can be either 1 or 2 years. Secondly, for council to elect that next mayor. The third action is to establish whether you wish to continue the office of deputy mayor, and the term of deputy mayor would be identical to that of the mayor. And if so, the 4th action would be for you to elect a deputy mayor for that identical term. So those are the 4 things we need to do. So the first item there is to determine the term of the mayor. Under the Local Government Act, council is required to determine by resolution whether the mayor would be for a 1 or 2 year term going next. So put it back to you. Thank you, Brendan.
Thanks,
run that.
Sarah. Can I have somebody move that motion, including a term? Councillor Rees?
Yes, I'd like to move that to motion with a 12-month, 1-year term.
Thank you. Seconder to that motion? Councillor Grant, thank you. Anyone wish to speak to that? Councillor Herry?
Thank you, CEO Brendan. I just want to say that 12-month, 1-year term seems to work for us, and it's not at all an onerous process to go through every year to elect a mayor, so can definitely support that.
Thank you, Councillor Herry. Anyone else wish to speak to that? No, I'll put that to the vote. All in favour? Carried, thank you. Item 13.2, election of mayor. Do we have any nominations for the position of mayor? Councillor Fitzpatrick.
Thank you, CEO. I'd like to nominate Councillor Dean Rees for the position of mayor.
Councillor Rees, are you prepared to accept that nomination?
I am prepared to accept that nomination. Thank you, CEO Mirawal, and thank you, Councillor Fitzpatrick.
Councillor Fitzpatrick, would you like to say anything in support of that motion?
Yes, thank you, Brendan. Why fix something that's not broken? Why change the channel when you agree with the program? I believe Councillor Rees has been a great captain in our term, and we need his leadership for another 12 months to keep us in shape. So I'm putting his nomination forward.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations for the position of mayor? No, only being one nomination, I declare Councillor Rees elected mayor. Congratulations. And I will ask Mayor Rees to assume the chair and take over the duties. Thank you.
I'm out of the chair for 5 minutes and my desk is a mess. So thank you, everybody. I'd just like to say a few words on my election. So, citizens, friends and colleagues at the rural city of Wangaratta, thank you for the honour that you're bestowing upon me. It is truly an honour and a privilege to be chosen again as the mayor of this dynamic region. I'm looking forward to continue the momentum we have gathered as a council and as a region as I start the new term as the rural city of Wangaratta's mayor. I'm proud of what we have achieved so far, but as you know, there is still an enormous amount of work here to be done, and I hold high expectations of the year ahead as our region begins to recover from the challenges of the last 2 years. I value the special opportunity that I've given to serve the rural city of Wangaratta as the mayor, and I commit to carrying on this role to the best of my ability. I express my sincere appreciation to my deputy mayor in the past, my previous deputy mayor, Councillor Bussell, and to all my fellow councillors. Thank you for the support that you give me. I can't do this job without the great support that you give, so thank you. It gives me great confidence knowing that a solid foundation has been built through the efforts and foresight, and I'm certain that the quality and the strength of a collective group of our councillors will hold the rural city in good stead. I'd like to congratulate whoever my next deputy mayor will be, and I look forward to working with them. This brings me to the core message of this evening. One of the strengths that the rural city of Wangaratta Council has together as a council, we have been working on a platform on which we wish to build on for many months prior to council elections. Many people have worked and assisted in putting together and actioning the council plan and our vision for the future. The results reflect the collective efforts of many talented people who are committed to working and making our community one of the most livable and vibrant municipalities in the state of Victoria. I'd like to thank our directors. I'd like to also thank Councillor Herry. He's going away on holidays and he still wants to be part of council. It's a great effort. 3 or 4 weeks away and he can't stay away, which is great. He's committed to our community, like all our councillors. So thank you, everybody. Now that this election is over, this part of it, let's get back to work. Thank you. mess here. So, ladies and gentlemen, the 13.3 is the establishment of a deputy mayor. So, Sarah's already done her brief on the 4 different appointments here tonight. Can I have a mover for the role of deputy mayor? That we have it, Councillor Herry, to move that. Can I have a seconder that we wish to include a deputy mayor's role? Councillor Dave Fuller. Would anybody like to talk on the role? Councillor Herry.
Thank you, Mayor Rees. Yeah, it's a pretty straightforward answer for me as to whether or not we have the role of a deputy mayor. I just think it provides for a smooth and continuation of the role of mayor in the mayor's absence, be it with notice or without notice. And I don't see a particular merit in keeping the deputy mayor role empty and filling it on an ad hoc basis. I think the term can be sorted with the 12-month or the 24-month decision, which we've just been through. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Herring. Councillor Fuller, did you want to talk? No? I'll put that recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? The recommendation is carried. 13.4 is the election of the Deputy Mayor. Do we have a nomination for Deputy Mayor, please? Oh, Councillor Fuller.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Bussell to retain the seat of Deputy Mayor, having given a good year of duty already. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Can I have someone second that recommendation? Councillor Fitzpatrick. Thank you. Any councillor who would like to talk? Dave, as the mover, would you like to talk on? No. Councillor Fitzpatrick. Any other councillor like to talk on Councillor Bussell? Thank you. I'll quickly talk on Councillor Bussell. Just one moment. Councillor Bussell's worked beside me for the last 12 months and I've enjoyed every bit of it. He's made himself available to everything that I've asked him to be at, and also to things that I haven't asked him to be at. But he's been there. He's been a great rock for me and a great support, and I hope I've been a great support to him as well. And I've enjoyed my 12 months and look forward to the next 12 months and beyond with Councillor Bussell. So thank you, Councillor Bussell. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. Excuse me, Mr Fox, put your hand down. You can ask a question at public question time at the end. There's no... Yep. There's only one nomination.
I believe I was able to ask a question when a motion came up for consideration.
Not for this. I'm conducting the meeting, but not for this. But thank you. You can ask it in general business. Thank you. So I'll declare Councillor Bussell as Deputy Mayor. Congratulations, Deputy Mayor Bussell. Could you please move seats? Well done. Moved a long way away, Dave. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll move on with general business. We're on to 13.5. Is the updated instrument of delegation to members of council staff, instrument of sub-delegation to members of council staff under the Environment Protection Act of 2017. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Mayor Rees. So the instruments of delegation are the means by which powers are allocated from council to members of council staff. There's 2 instruments of delegation that presented to you this evening. The first one is the general instrument of delegation to council staff, and the second is an instrument of sub-delegation to council staff under the Environment Protection Act, also known as the EPA. So the first of those instruments primarily incorporates updates relating to the new Planning and Environment Amendments Act 2021, and there's detail in the report about what those changes are, along with a couple of other updates relating, just keep us up to date with other updates in other legislation and regulations. The second one is an instrument of subdelegation which will allocate powers to officers relating to the Environment Protection Act primarily regarding management of wastewater systems and also noise from construction, demolition or removal of residential properties. There's a fairly detailed recommendation there in the agenda. I won't go through all the detail of that, just having provided a summary of what we're requesting councillors to resolve. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Director Brindley. Are there any questions from the gallery on this item? No, thank you. Can I have a mover on this item? Councillor Grant and Councillor Harry to second. Councillor Grant, did you need to talk on this item? No, thank you. Thank you. Councillor Harry, would you like to talk? No?
Yeah, just to reiterate Councillor Grant's comments, I think Director Brindley covered it pretty well. It's a fairly straightforward item with just numerous small tweaks there to the instrument of delegation and formalising authority for a couple of items that have been carried out by council in the past, and just formalising that, tidying it up, which is good.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillors like to talk on the recommendation? I'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? The recommendation is carried. We'll move on to item 13.6, which is the appointment of councillors to the Audit and Risk Committee. Director Brindley, please.
Thank you. So under the Local Government Act, council is also required to have an Audit and Risk Committee established, and that must, as part of the charter of the Audit and Risk Committee, include 2 members who are councillors. It's the anniversary of the appointment of our previous 2 councillors to that committee, and thank you to Dean Rees and Harry Bussell for the time they've given to the committee. So just seeking for councillors to nominate for the next year the membership of 2 councillors again to that committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brindley. Is anyone from the gallery like to ask a question on this recommendation? No? Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Fuller.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that yourself, Councillor Rees and Councillor Bussell retain their seats on the Audit Advisory Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Can we have a seconder, please? Councillor Fitzpatrick to second. Councillor Fuller, did you want to say anything on the recommendation as the mover?
I'd like to just thank the pair of you. It is a arduous task in some ways, but we are very pleased to have you both do it previously and to continue doing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Councillor Fitzpatrick, did you have anything to add? No? Any other councillor like to talk on the recommendation? Councillor Herry.
Yeah, I'll just back up Councillor Fuller's comments and thank you both for your time on the Audit and Risk Committee and committing again. And I just want to thank the committee members as well at large, and just thank their hard work, diligent work over the past 12 months. It's been quite busy in that space, and it's certainly a very important space of operation for councils. So appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Herry. I'd also like to add I welcome any other councillor to, which I know Councillor Herry is going to come and review the Audit Committee with us there on a number of occasions through this year, and I look forward to his thoughts on it from there. So I'll put the recommendation, unless Councillor Fuller, you had something. Councillor Bussell, did you have something? No. Councillor Fuller, nothing to close off? No. I'll put the recommendation of the vote. All those in favour? And the recommendation is carried. Thank you, Councillor. Director Brindley. 13.7, Chief Executive Officer's employment and remuneration. Chief Executive Officer, could you please state your conflict again, and also Director Brindley, your conflict?
Yeah, just to note, as previously mentioned, I have a material conflict of interest in this policy, given that it relates directly to employment matters of the CEO.
Thank you, Director Brindley.
Thank you. So I have also declared a material conflict of interest in my involvement in preparing this report, as I report directly to the CEO, who stands to benefit from this report. However, under Council's governance rules and in accordance with my expertise at Council, I am authorised to continue to present this report. Also, I'm not the decision maker, Council is, and we have taken independent legal advice where required.
Thank you, Director, as author of the report. Any questions from the gallery on this report? No. Can I have someone move the recommendation? Councillor Herry. And a seconder, please, Councillor Fitzpatrick. Councillor Herry, did you want to talk on this report?
Yeah, briefly. Thank you, Mayor Rees. It's a fairly straightforward item, relatively, this one. It's policy we're required to adopt by December as per the Local Government Act. And we have, as Director Brindley pointed out, sought legal advice in reviewing the current CEO contract and just maybe paying a little bit more attention to a slightly complex element that was introduced with the superannuation guarantee being increased. So we had a pretty good look at that, and ultimately, taking into account the intention of the superannuation guarantee and that legal advice, came out with this policy as it's recommended. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Herry. Would any other councillor like to talk on this? No. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? The recommendation is carried. Thank you, Director Brindley. You're done. Now, I'll now hand over to Director Marcus Goonan, Infrastructure Services 14.1, which is community grants. Thank you, Director.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This report is presented to Council to provide recommendations in relation to the 21-22 Community Grants Program. The Community Grants Program supports community-led programs and projects that will develop and enhance the social, cultural and environmental experience for local residents. Community Grants Program received 49 applications with a total request amount of $311,808. The Community Grants Assessment Panel recommended 30 of those projects for funding, with 16 projects being delivered within urban Wangaratta and 14 projects delivered in the rural areas. The recommendation is that Council awards a total of $160,142 in funding to the following 30 projects as per the recommendation.
Thank you. Any questions from the gallery on the community grants recommendation? No. I'll look to Council for a mover. Councillor Grant and Councillor Fuller. Councillor Grant, did you want to talk on this?
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Just Councillor Grant. No, mic didn't come on.
It's not on?
No. That'll be fine. You've got a loud enough voice.
Well, I have.
You have.
And I'll plan to exercise it. Look, I think community grants are at the heart of some of the good work that Council does. I'd like to commend and acknowledge the people that have taken the trouble to put in an application. Significant work that gets done, but we've been able to spread the money across the community, spread it into areas that will make a difference to people in the community, and I think our community grants program is a fantastic initiative and one that, you know, in the future certainly encourage community groups to be part of it and to you know, put in an application, because, you know, the broader the cross-section, the more beneficial the money is, you know, and the work that gets done.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. Councillor Fuller.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Congratulate the 30 recipients of these grants, and I look forward to, as a group, being invited along to updates, unveilings and events as they are coming to fruition, which should be exciting. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Fuller, thank you. Councillor Herry.
Thank you, Mayor Rees. Yeah, absolutely. Congratulations to all of the groups, and I commend them for their hard work in submitting grant applications. It can be a big job, and look forward to all the work that will come out of projects, and appreciate all their extensive work that's not just covered in the projects under these grants. For the unsuccessful applicants, you will receive notification of the outcome, absolutely, and I do encourage you to follow up with officers and follow up with councillors as well, just to engage with that in that discussion around, you know, what elements of the application, you know, could be strengthened for the future, or different projects that you might be able to focus on at different points in the future. So just want to put that out there.
Thank you. Councillor Fitzpatrick.
Thanks, Mr. Howard. I also just want to relay what Councillor Harry said. There is definitely other pools of grants that we have here at Council, and please do work with our officers to see where you best fit in. It might be another stream of pool of funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bussell.
It's very short, and I think everything's all been said and well said by all my colleagues here. So it's a great program for our community. Thank you.
Councillor Benton.
I don't think I can add any more. It's all been said, so
Great.
well done to everybody.
Councillor Grant, as the mover, did you want to finish, or you're okay? Okay, I'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? And the recommendation is carried. Director Goonan, the grants and sponsorship policy, please.
Yes, Mr Mayor. This report is presented to Council to recommend the draft grants and sponsorship policy is placed on public exhibition for a period of 60 days. A review was undertaken into the rural city's delivery of grants and sponsorship program. The review made a number of recommendations around strengthening the process and transparency of Council's grants and sponsorships. These include having an overarching policy that lays out objectives, process and roles and responsibilities for awarding of funds for both grants and sponsorships. The recommendation is that Council endorses the grant sponsorship policy for 60 days of public exhibition, reviews and considers adopting the draft grants sponsorship policy at the March Council meeting. If no submissions are received, changes the policy. If no submissions requesting changes to the policy are received, adopts the grant and sponsorship policy without further resolution. This policy will also replace the community grants policy once adopted.
Thank you, Director. Any questions from the gallery? No, thank you. Can I have a mover of this? Councillor Herry and Councillor Benton. Councillor Herry, did you want to talk on this policy?
Thank you, Mayor Rees. Yeah, I just want to flag the 60-day exhibition period and closing of public input and submissions on January 21st. So I think that's important to highlight because things definitely do take time to circulate through community groups when we put documents out there, and I think the 60-day period will definitely be appreciated, especially in the holiday season that we're heading into. So that extra time on this policy, and also all documents we put out into the public realm where possible, where there's no particular pressing urgency for them to come back to us in a shorter period, I think would generally be well received by the community and facilitate input. So just a few words around the policy. It's adding a bit of rigour to the process of the community grant and sponsorship distribution, and it, as Director Goonan highlighted, it's off the tail of a 2019 review. So a number of the responses and recommendations in that review have been put in place for a long period of time and have been put to work, but this is just formalising them in the policy document. And as with many of these public-facing policy documents, there are background documents and guidelines there which are supporting the implementation. So I definitely encourage community groups to have a look at it and see how it might impact them and their application and engagement with future grant processes. And just raise any concerns they might have, because I'm sure some people might think with increased acquittal requirements or some of those extra burdens that there could be concerns regarding workload. And these organisations are all run by hardworking volunteers. So, but I'll just finish in saying that I'm confident the policy won't be placing a huge burden, a huge bureaucratic burden in that sense on our groups. Absolutely. I think it's just tightening up and good governance. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Herry. Councillor Benton, did you want to talk?
Yes, I just have a question to the Director. In your item number 3, where it says no submissions requesting change to the policy or received, how do we identify the change? Because I've noticed this in a couple of other recommendations. If there's no change being asked for, the definition of change, is it going to be the person states I want a change and it may not be a change? Does it come back to us then, or is it just flows on?
Yeah, so if we receive submissions on this, we will report back to council on those submissions.
Well, that's even if they don't want change.
No, so if there's no, we will report back to council regardless if we receive submissions. If we conclude that there is no changes, then this would then adopt that policy if there is no changes to it, even based on the submissions received.
Yeah.
CEO McGrath.
Yeah, perhaps through the Mayor, one of the reasons we make that distinction is we do sometimes reasonably often get submissions that are just positively in support of what's being proposed. So in those circumstances, if it's just in support of the policy, we wouldn't bring it back for final consideration by council, whereas if someone's making a submission that's saying, I don't agree with point 11 or point 13, or I think this is wrong, then that's, in that situation, is where we would bring it back to a further meeting for council to determine their response to those submissions.
Thank you. Any other councillor like to talk on the recommendation? Councillor Herry, anything to finish off as the mover of that recommendation? Nope. Nope. Okay, put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? And the recommendation is carried. Director Goonan, 14.3, which is the draft Mirawal Park Master Plan.
Thank you. This report is presented to council to recommend the draft Mirawal Park Master Plan be placed on public exhibition for 60 days. The existing master plan for Mirawal Park was developed in 2014. Since the master plan was developed, councillors completed several plans and feasibility studies which have impacted on its usage and its ageing infrastructure. A consultant was engaged to deliver the community and stakeholder engagement process and capture the community's future vision for the Mirawal Park area. The scope of the works included the development of Mirawal Park Master Plan, including landscaping concepts and a 10-year action plan. The recommendation for council is to endorse the draft Mirawal Park Master Plan for a 60-day public exhibition period, review and consider adopting the Mirawal Park Master Plan at the March meeting, and if no submissions are requesting changes to the master plan are received, adopts without further resolution.
Thank you, Director Goonan. Questions from the gallery on the Mirawal Park Master Plan? Please stand forward and Mr. Fox, state your name for the record and your question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Brian Fox. The master plan for Mirawal Park, I believe, is a mystery to most people. Unless you look on the council website or you read the Chronicle, you would have no idea what is going to happen down there. Now, if you want to tell me I'm wrong, well, that's because to me, I only speak the truth.
You are wrong. No, you are right, actually, because we haven't put it out yet. This is the draft. It's going to go out as of tonight's meeting. It will go out. So then you can get it and read it. So you haven't been able to see it and discuss it. Director Goonan, anything further on that?
I could just add that as part of developing this document to that point, we have had several online community and stakeholder engagement sessions. And we have also directly contacted key stakeholders, including the Lawn Tennis Club, Lions Club, Urban Land Care Group, and some others from the general community.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Fuller?
Up to and including Councillor Fitzpatrick and myself did a video on our Facebook, so it's been out there for quite a while. Thank you.
For the draft. Does that answer your question, Mr. Fox?
Mostly, sir. I would like to add a little bit. My experience with council about informing what structural changes are going to happen is quite disappointing. I had to plead, beg, and whatever words you like to put on it, to get a plan for the Norton Street design put up. The works were going ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Mayor, this is point of order, isn't it?
Point of order that it's irrelevant to the matter under consideration?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr Fox, that's not the question. This is about Mirawal Park. If you've got a complaint about that, you're welcome to write in, which I think you already have, and we did solve that problem and get that up. So it's a point of order raised by Councillor Benton that it's relevant to the matter under consideration. So if you've got a question on the Mirawal Park master plan, please raise that.
I'll concentrate on, and thank you, Councillor Benton. I'll remember that. I believe that we need a large board down in the park. In fact, I think we need 3 or 4 boards down in the park, which, as Spot says, you are standing here and this toilet block is going to move from there to there or whatever, and there needs to be a big board up on Riley Street. My Councillor Benton, just forgive me here, my experience has been that this doesn't happen with this council. So I'm asking that happen. Now, when the subject of this revamp of the park came up, I wrote to the council and I asked them could they put a slide, a very gentle slide from Riley Street down into the playground so the children could get on the slide and slip down into the sandpit. The response was absolute silence.
Mr Fox, the document is going out for public exhibition. I suggest you make a submission. Your submission will be looked at and reviewed here amongst all of us because as per the recommendation says, so I suggest you put in a submission and we look forward to getting it.
Are you offering me, Mr Mayor, the courtesy that if I put in a submission, it will be dealt with effectively?
It will be dealt with professionally, like all our submissions. I'm not telling you it's going to get that slide or anything along, but it will be discussed. I promise you that. All submissions are.
I thank you.
Thank you, Mr Fox. So thank you. No other questions from the gallery. I'll now refer to Councillor Herry. Please, Councillor Herry.
Thank you, Mayor Rees. I'd like to move a motion as per the recommendation, subject to the following change. Removal of point 3 of the recommendation.
Great, that's all. Can I have someone second that, Councillor Dave Fuller? Thank you, Councillor Herry. Councillor Herry, as the mover, would you like to please talk on the recommendation?
Yes, certainly. So I'll just start by explaining my motion, which was slightly different to the recommendation. I definitely acknowledge and recognise that the engagement so far has been somewhat limited. Obviously, it hasn't been out for public exhibition yet, so that explains a large portion of it. We have conducted it, as Director Goonan outlined, a number of sessions with stakeholders and with some community members, but the attendance, I guess, and input to some of those sessions was limited, particularly with a broader community. But that is the point of this endorsement and putting it out to public exhibition for public comment. So I definitely, there's just one more thing I'll say with respect to the big board idea in the question. I definitely am open to considering different ways that we can get information out there, like, you know, information boards or a large printout of a change that might be happening to your park, because I think ultimately parks are a really important facet of community life, and they're important for mental and physical well-being. Interestingly and very timely, Deakin just completed a significant study on parks and aspects of parks that appeal to different age groups and different demographics. And I think it's really key that we develop this park in a way that is appealing to all of those different demographics and pulls in a really mixed bunch. And I think this master plan in its draft form definitely captures some of the elements identified in that study at least, and does integrate those quiet places, quiet spaces and lots of walking paths and scope for adventure playgrounds and proximity to cafes. But ultimately, I move the motion such that it will definitely come back before council for further resolution, even in the situation that there are no submissions in this public exhibition period, which I would be surprised if there weren't any submissions. I think we'll get good input from the community. But if there weren't submissions, I feel it warrants coming back for further consideration by councillors and in discussion with CMT, I guess, just around what might be the explanation for a lack of input into such a significant facet of Wangaratta that is Mirawal Park, and maybe looking at some of those creative ideas on how we can drum up some more input. So I'll just highlight a couple of notable changes to bring them to attention that are in the plan. The toilet blocks will be moved and removed is one, filling in of the moat, and a number of internal road realignments and extended playgrounds. So I really encourage everyone to get in there, have a look at the plan and give us your input. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Herry. Any other councillor like to talk on the recommendation put forward? Councillor Fitzpatrick.
Thanks,
Mr. Mayor, this is probably a little impertinent, but given that Christmas, New Year will be within these 60 days, could we extend that 60-day period to 90 days? Thank you.
No. So thank you. Sit down, Mr. Fox, please. You've finished your questions. Sit down. So, Councillor Fitzpatrick.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. We all know how much our community love Mirawal Park, so I really strongly urge our community groups, our community members to please make submissions. Go down there, have a look, especially young families that are using those, and Access for All Abilities. I really want to see some great submissions, and I look forward to your constructive submission, Mr. Fox. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fitzpatrick. Any other conversations from council here? Thank you, councillors. Councillor Herry, nothing to finish off with? Nope. We'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you, and the recommendation is carried. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to move over to 14.4, which Director Goonan will talk of, and Councillor Bustle will just take the reins for a couple of minutes as I need to step out, and I'll be back in 2 minutes. Thank you, Councillor Bustle.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Director Goonan, 14.4, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Bustle. This report is presented to Council for consideration, recommendations provided in response to a petition of 284 signatures on behalf of the Moyu Soldiers Memorial Hall Committee of Management, tabled at Council's last meeting in October. The petition requests Council complete remedial works and renovations necessary to prevent further degradation of the building and to provide a community asset fit for purpose now and into the future. Council officers have reviewed the information that has been provided and also previous work that was completed, and recommends that Council engage with the Moyu community and refine the scope of the renewal works required, and submit a budget brief of $350,000 to complete the renewal works on the existing hall in the 22-23 financial year. And the final recommendation is the response to the first signatory of the petition.
Thank you, Director Goonan. Anybody in the public like to speak? Thank you, Neil.
Neil Jarrett, Secretary of the Moyu Soldiers Memorial Hall Committee. I only read the agenda shortly before I came in tonight, and so I haven't been in touch with any of the other members of the committee. But I just, from my own personal thing, I think they'd be delighted with the recommendation that's in the agenda. And thank you to yourself in particular, and anyone that's been involved with the council in working out that recommendation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil. Mr. Mayor's back, so.
Thank you, Councillor Bustle. Are there any other questions from the gallery? No. Thank you. Can I have somebody to move this motion? Councillor Bustle to move it. Councillor Grant to second it. Councillor Bustle, did you want to talk on the recommendation?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Firstly, I want to thank the community for the dedication to the hall and volunteering in Moorview. The work that's done there benefits many, many people. And I'd have to say, as the councillor of a southern ward, the Moorview community is one of the strongest communities that I have. And I think the petition really, really showed how committed the community is to the infrastructure around Moorview and what it actually means to the community. And all these facilities added, and particularly when they're used, makes the community a lot more resilient and a lot more cohesive, and I really treasure that. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other Councillor Grant, please?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Now, this is certainly a recommendation that I'm happy to support. There's been, you know, as Councillor Bustle said, there's been a lot of interest by the Moorview community. You know, they're really keen to see, you know, that hall, which has been a part of that local community for a very long time. They're keen to see that retained. And I think what came out to me was the fact that, council always has an issue about where it's going to spend its money. It's got a limited budget and it's got to spread it across a big municipality. But what we've elected to do here, and we're trusting that the community supports this, is to renew the existing hall, not to build a $1 million edifice, because that's clearly not something that we can afford to do. But it's important to retain and maintain the facility that the community clearly enjoys, and so I'm happy to support it. And I think it's been one of those examples where we've looked at the issue laterally and hope that we've come up with the right solution. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. Councillor Harry.
Thank you, Mayor Rees. It's clearly a very much well-loved hall and community facility, as Councillor Bustle has indicated and outlined. And just to follow on a little bit from Councillor Grant's comments, of course, there would have been the option to conduct a really extensive feasibility study and look at, developing something that could have been a $1-2 million, or look at that as an option, perhaps, along with the renewal course of action. But ultimately, there's a lot of support around this venue as it exists, and I think the renewal works outlined for it are going to bring it really back up to scratch, and also include some improvements. And just with respect to possible other courses of action, even if we spent a significant amount of funds on a feasibility study with consultants, it would be money sunk in exploring various options. And if there was an option that was a really substantial, huge project identified, ultimately the long-term financial plan is fairly constrained. We have financial constraints, and we've got a number of cost escalations which are coming out due to materials costs in some capital expenditure projects. So ultimately it could have been something that wouldn't have happened in the next 5 years, certainly not, possibly not in the next 10 sort of thing. So I think to get on with this renewal course of action is going to be welcome by the community, as was outlined in the petition, and it's going to really add value to the facilities out there in Moorview. So I can definitely lend my support to this course of action. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Herring. Any other councillor like to talk before I finish off? So before I go back to you, Moorview community, thank you for being here, representing. Be thankful to your ward councillor. Without the great work that he does, constantly, annoyingly advocating for his great southern land, projects like this wouldn't be happening. So I know he's very diligent with you guys. I've been at a number of your meetings, but even the meetings going up all the way through that valley with the Whitfield community groups, etc., that Councillor Bustle always seems to chair and be a part of. He loves the community, he supports you, so great job, Councillor Bustle. Thank you, and I'll hand over to Councillor Bustle to end off.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I also want to thank the staff and my colleagues to get to this point. It's been a very long process for the More You Hall to get to here, so thank you all, everybody.
So I'll put the recommendation to the vote. Are all those in favour accepting 14.4? The recommendation is carried. Director Goonan, 14.5, the Curtis Lane naming proposal.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This report is presented to Council to consider a proposal to name the lane between 46 and 44 Reed Street in Wangaratta, Curtis Lane. The lane provides access to car park number 2 from Reed Street. A letter was received from the family of the late Graham and Lois Curtis seeking the name the laneway beside Curtis Adams Pharmacy in honour of Curtis Lane, in their honour, Curtis Lane. The place naming committee considered the request at its recent meeting and believed that the following information regarding the Graham and Lois is worthy of recognition, and that information can be read in the council report. The recommendation is that council endorse the place naming committee recommendation and place this on public display for a period of 30 days, inviting submissions from the community. Review and consider adopting the recommendation to name the laneway at the February council meeting, taking in consideration all submissions. If no objections are received, the proposal adopted without further resolution, proceeding to seek final approval from the Geographical Name Register.
Thank you, Director Goonan. Any questions from the gallery, please, on this one? Mr Fox, please step forward.
I'll be looking forward, Mr Mayor, to that 30 days to make a submission on this. I agree with all the sentiments about Mr Curtis. But however, there was Mr Eames, Mr Sicily, the people who owned the hotels. There was Mr Purdy in the same building before Mr Curtis came along. And when you look at the list and that of the things that Mr Curtis had participated in during his term of business in Wangaratta, there are lots of other things that could be named after him. Now, that laneway is a T-shaped laneway. It comes out into Murphy Street. Am I going all right, Mr Benton? It comes out into Murphy Street. It comes out into Victoria Parade. It has hundreds of people parking there every day. So, I think it needs a little bit of scrutiny. We may come back to the same conclusion as the Name Place Committee, but I think it needs further discussion. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr Fox. I look forward to your submission. No other questions from the gallery? Can I have a move at Councillor Benton to move it and Councillor Fuller to second the recommendation? Councillor Benton, did you want to talk on the recommendation?
Yes, I think it's a very, very good decision that this has been made. And to answer some of the last speakers, this letter comes from the family of the Curtises, and I think we should show respect to those people that have asked for that. They didn't ask for anything else, they've asked for that. So I think it's due respect that we do that. Graham has been around for a long time. All these other names, people have their opportunity to ask for these names to be placed. There's plenty of other lanes and places in Wangaratta. So I've known Graham. I didn't do business with Graham, but I knew Graham very well. And I think he's well deserved for him and his wife to have this little bit of a memorial to them in Wangaratta. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Benton. Any other councillors like to talk on the recommendation? Councillor Bustle.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. Do we have any streets called Fox Street in Wangaratta?
Not at present.
Fox Lane? Well, there's hope yet, so we'll look forward to that. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Bussell. I'd like to talk on the Curtises, as I knew Graham and the family used to go to his chemist shop there on that corner of that laneway, which fits that laneway. I certainly know the family of Graham and Lois more so than Graham, as I was a younger person when there, but I remember Mum and Dad going there as a child in there to get their pharmacy products filled out, etc. And the family are wonderful people and have put this name forward all in good faith and knowing that it was going to take a certain amount of time, and I congratulate them for putting it forward for us to consider at the place naming committee, which we have had, and here for council discussion. I look forward to councillors accepting this recommendation. Councillor Benton, if there's no other, I'll go back to you, nothing further. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? And the recommendation is carried. Director Goonan, 14.7, which is 14.6, which is the North Wangaratta Netball Court Contract Award.
This report is presented to Council to provide details of the tender evaluation and recommendations for contract award for the construction of the netball courts at North Wangaratta Recreation Reserve. It also is seeking Council's approval under the budget variation policy to add an additional budget of $82,100 excluding GST, utilising savings from existing capital works program. The program of works has been a 2-year staged approach. The delivery of the oval lighting upgrade was completed last financial year, and this report relates to stage 2, which is the upgrade of the existing netball courts. There has been some recent cost escalations to construction projects, particularly increases in material prices, and this has resulted in the forecast overspend increasing to total project expenditure of $777,100. The recommendation is that Council approve the budget variation request for the additional $82,000 and awards the contract for the construction of the netball courts to Idwilla Proprietary Limited, and authorises the Chief Executive Officer to sign the documents when available and disclose the contract amount.
Thank you, Director Goonan. Are there any questions from the gallery? Thank you. Can I have a mover, Councillor Benton, to move the recommendation, and a seconder would be Councillor Bussell. Councillor Benton, did you want to talk on the recommendation?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Yes, I think this is starting to come to the fruition of a finalisation of, if I can put it that way, of the adversities that happened out at North Wangaratta, and this will just be a little bit of a, if I can say, icing on the cake to that facility. We've seen it being used a lot more because, as I've heard the Mayor say many, many times, build it and they will come. And I think that's what it's done. I know there's going to be discussions with the committees out there going forward to accommodate some of the constraints that have been placed upon us in relationship to costing and so forth, so we can manipulate the court arrangement. So I look forward to those discussions going forward. So this is starting to the finalisation of the recreation area of North Wangaratta, and let that community sort of live again.
Thank you, Councillor Benton. Any other councillors like to talk on the recommendation? Nope. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? And the recommendation is carried. Yes, can we disclose the amount, Director Goonan?
Yes.
We've already disclosed the people, Idwilla.
Yep, it is $476,139.95, excluding GST.
Thank you, Director Goonan. 14.7, Director, Wangaratta Clay Target Club Remedial Works Update.
This report is presented to Council to provide an update on the Wangaratta Clay Target Club site remediation works and financial impacts associated with an increased quantities and categorisation of contaminated material removed from site. The site remediation works are well advanced, with works anticipated to be completed late this month. The works have generated significantly greater volumes of contaminated material at a higher waste classification than originally anticipated. This has resulted in a contract variation request of $140,000. In line with Council's procurement policy, all contract variations related to the lump sum contract amount that exceeds the CEO's financial delegation require Council's approval. The financial variation to the value of $140,000 has been approved by the funding body, the Department of Land, Water and Planning, and they will cover the final costs. There is no additional cost to Council. The recommendation is that Council approve the variation, resulting in a revised contract value.
Thank you, Director Gurner. Can I have a mover for that, please? Councillor Herry and Councillor Benton to second it. Councillor Herry, did you need to talk on the recommendation? No. Councillor Benton.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I think once again it's in the same area as the last item on the agenda, and it also is starting to show the light that this club will be able to get back to normality. This is nearly five plus years since this started, and I would like to stress and reiterate what Director Gurnan has said. This is not coming out of ratepayers' money. This is coming out of the dwell money that has been put aside, extra, that has now additional of the $140,000 put aside for this work in removal of the contaminated lands, and hopefully by November the club can enjoy some freedom and movement in that community, because they've been through enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Herry. Do you want to talk? No?
Good. Yep, if no one else wants to.
Just one moment, sorry. Yep. Did any other councillor want to talk on the recommendation? No. Councillor Herry?
Thank you, Mayor Rees. I just want to, put a bit of support behind Councillor Benton's comments there. It has been a long time coming, and that community has struggled with the impact upon their facilities. And just highlight as well that it isn't at a cost to council, and it is being covered by DELP. So appreciation to them for coming to the table on that one, and that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Herry. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? And the recommendation is carried. I'd now like to introduce Acting Director Celeste Brockwell from Development Services to talk on item 15.1. This is a planning permit application in PIN application 21/175, Cicely Avenue, Wangaratta, development of a warehouse store, removal of the native vegetation and reduction in bicycle facilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This report is presented to Council to determine a planning permit application for the development of a warehouse store and auxiliary office. Whilst the use is acceptable under the Industrial Zone 1, the proposal includes removal of native vegetation. The planning scheme states that the proposals for the removal of native vegetation must consider whether the loss of native vegetation can be avoided, minimised and then offset. The proposal does not address the requirements of avoiding and minimising vegetation loss. The vegetation to be removed is considered of high ecological value and classified as endangered. Council officer's recommendation is to refuse the granting of the permit under section 61.1C of the Planning Environment Act at 1987 for planning permit application 21/175 at Cicely Avenue, Wangaratta, for the development of a warehouse store and auxiliary office, removal of native vegetation and reduction in bicycle facilities, based on the grounds that are listed and are currently on the screen.
Thank you very much. Before I go to an alternate recommendation that Councillor Bustles has, are there any questions from the gallery? No, thank you. Councillor Bustle, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have an alternate motion. I'll just read out point 1.2. Issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit with respect to planning permit application PIN app 21/175 for development of a store and ancillary office, removal of native vegetation and a reduction in bicycle facilities at Cicely Avenue, Wangaratta, in accordance with the permit conditions detailed below, and advises the applicant and all submitters of council decisions. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Bustle. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Fitzpatrick. Councillor Bustle, did you want to talk on the recommendation as the mover?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got a couple of things here. I've been grown up around Wangaratta all my life, and one of the reasons why I'm on council was in order to make this a more vibrant place so we don't lose our young people and other people leaving Wangaratta. And this development's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle, a very large one. It's a very important part of the puzzle to improve the vibrancy of Wangaratta. Having been on the front line of the 2020 bushfires for some time and seeing thousands of trees burnt to death, and then going through there again and seeing thousands and thousands of trees regenerate, I probably look through a slightly different lens to a lot of people. I think that now's the time for council to look at a tree lot, and my pledge to the people that are concerned about what my recommendation is my pledge is to pursue the council to have a tree lot, which I think is well overdue, and I think that will show a lot of leadership in the vegetation space for us to look into that. So I hope that this recommendation is supported in the progress of development for our future generations, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Benton. Bustle. Sorry, that's a faux pas of mine. Other councillors like to talk for or against the recommendation? Councillor Grant, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, I'm actually going to speak against the recommendation put forward by Councillor Bustle. I'm opposed to the removal of native vegetation, and although I will concede that, whether this is remnant vegetation is probably another debate that we could have. I'm more concerned that, the application and the recommendation from the council officers that the actual application doesn't avoid or minimise the removal of vegetation, and that concerns me enormously. And I think around the rural city of Wangaratta we see many examples of where developments have gone ahead and just simply raised the vegetation because it was easier to do it that way. And whether it actually looked better or was better for our community was almost beside the point. And I think we've reached a point where we need to look at, making our community softer and greener, and regardless of whether that's in the industrial or whether that's in the residential area. And I really think that this application potentially could have gone back to the drawing board and actually looked at it and perhaps more positively assessed whether it was necessary to remove this vegetation, because it's easy to do so. And I'm really concerned that, as I said, this happens far too often, and while I acknowledge that we need progress and we need development in our community, there's also a way of doing that actually is a positive. And so I won't be supporting the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. Councillor Herry.
Thank you, Mayor Rees. Yeah, I would just like to acknowledge a lot of what Councillor Grant has pointed out. Development, definitely. I'm not opposed to the concept of that, but you have to look at each individual application or situation and look at the costs and consider at what cost. Now, we've heard about thousands of trees being burned down and then thousands of new ones popping up. But what you have are thousands of perhaps 100-year-old trees being burned down and thousands of day-old trees popping up. And it's really difficult to put a value on and kind of quantify what is the worth in age of something like that, a tree or vegetation. And it has not been determined. The onus would be on the applicant to you provide evidence if they want to substantiate any claims regarding whether or not it is actually remnant vegetation or not, but they're very substantial trees. And ultimately that really gets to the crux of it, and Councillor Grant made the point that the applicant hasn't done their duty in going to the full extent, or they haven't explored the options and outlined the justification for requiring the removal of the trees to progress the sort of development they want to pursue. And ultimately that's the onus and responsibility of an applicant that is looking to remove vegetation that is native and more to the point is a identified endangered, nationally and state identified endangered ecological vegetation class. Again, it's difficult to put a value on what that means, but I think endangered things are definitely have a lot of inherent value. And do we just want to knock them down so that development can continue, and we can speculate as much as we want about the benefit and the wealth that development will or will not necessarily bring to our community? Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillors like to talk on the recommendation? Councillor Fuller, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Whilst I sympathise with both Councillor Grant and Councillor Herry, I also acknowledge that in our endeavour to be leaders of the future, we have the opportunity to, whilst we might approve this, and some of us might approve this, we also have the ability to lead more tree planting. And as Councillor Bussell mentioned, tree lot and such, we could be responsible for being the leaders of future trees that are there for another 1,000 years and so on and so on. And whilst this is not the preferred method of operation for some of us, it is equally important for us to consider both sides. And whilst it is a conversation around development versus native vegetation, it's also a case of us deciding, well, where is what best placed? And in this instance, that is the industrial zone, and there is the ability for jobs and such to be created from this. So I'm favouring the support of this alternative recommendation. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Councillor Benton, anything?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I must admit I've struggled with this one probably more than I thought I would. And this afternoon I did a fair bit of reading of some of the policies and in the Planning Act. And the policies do also state around economic development that we should have and weigh up. That I failed to come to some conclusion that in the 57 section of 57 of the Act, in relationship to the trees actually have got to be able to provide the habitat that is going to be there. The industrial zone going forward, I find it a little bit, if we're going to have an industrial zone, are we just going to have an industrial zone that has got clear-felled now? The other point that I worry about, the alteration of this building to accommodate these trees, they're over probably 30 metres high, some of them. When they die, they still can't be removed under the Vegetation Act. Now, the danger that happens, and I'm afraid I've seen too many trees like that start to fall going forward. Now, this planning scheme has got to be around about a little bit of, I think, going forward, of where it's going to end up if we allow this, if we allow it, we've got to be able to remove the dangers to the people because it's in a work zone, and I find it a little bit hypocritical that we have these situations and then we allow these things to grow and a tree will fall over, and we've heard it many, many times around this table. Oh yes, they will fall. So you've got to weigh up going forward. I've struggled with it, I must admit. When I first saw this application, I thought, well, they could move that. When I had a look at it, I don't think they've got the ability to move because you take 30 feet or 30 metres of fall of a tree, it will impact on their buildings. If we're going to have an industrial zone, I do support Councillor Bussell's idea, and I think it's far overcome. But I also will say, Mr Mayor, as I've stated recently, this offset situation is that complex, and I think it's slighted against us being able to use some of our vegetation within our own council facility. We have a vast area, particularly in Councillor Bussell's zone, of trees. And I know that's probably outside what's on the front of us at the table in relation to planning, but I think it's got to be publicly debated out going forward and a bit more common sense put into it so we know where we're going in relationship to be able to make sure the trees, if they're going to be offsetted, are offsetted in our own municipality. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Benton. Steve, have you got your pen to write this down? Is this sending the wrong message to council with this is the right recommendation? The previous recommendation, which is not on the table, is sending the wrong message. If we don't approve this, we're sending out to people to say, don't come to Wangaratta, don't come and build your business in an industrial site with a tree on it, makes land, devalue the land. Let me just point out, as trees get larger, two things happen. They become more vulnerable to other causes of death, example, storms, drought, lightning strikes. They start to run out of nutrients, or to get them to transport water efficiently. As a result, their net uptake of CO2 slows down and can nearly approach zero. A recent study found that young trees take up CO2 much easier, quicker and faster globally than old forests, perhaps suggesting that new trees planted today could offset our carbon sins of much more effectively than old trees. Let's take a step forward here. If we don't step forward, we'll be in the same place. Let me also state, council can't be seen to give double standards. Council needed to knock some big trees out to build a multi-million-dollar, $80 million swimming pool. Guess what? Got the tick of approval. I never saw you avoiding or minimising come up for that one. We had to pay nearly $300,000 worth of $300,000 worth of offsets, which this owner's happy to pay. The offsets, just like council was happy to pay to get their development through. This owner wants to develop a property to bring business to Wangaratta. We developed a pool to bring people to the pool and use it and make money from it and to be part of our community. So is there a double standard? It's all right for council to knock trees over, but not all right for an individual that, yes, may make money out of it as well, as in rent his property, build a shed and rent his property. That to me is double standards. Could we have avoided the trees and moved the pool elsewhere? No, we couldn't have. That was the best place for the pool. I agree wholeheartedly. This is the best place for his shed or warehouse or new business to go on there, is where those trees are, and to build to the maximum amount on that parcel of land. Double standards, I don't like it. I won't put up with it. So I urge all my councillors, even the ones who have said no, they're not going to support Councillor Bussel's recommendation, to change your recommendation, to change your support and vote yes and show solidarity. Councillor Bussell, as the mover of the recommendation, anything further?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. You know, this is always a balancing act, and I think we can do both here, and we can do more than just have 9 old trees. We can do a long way more. And my pledge to the community is to pursue not funny trees, actual real trees, not little shrubs, proper big trees, to pursue that over the next 3 years. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I urge everybody to support the motion.
Councillor Bussell, thank you. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour of the alternate recommendation? The recommendation is carried. All those against? Noted that Councillor Grant and Councillor Herry against. Thank you.
Excuse me, Mayor
Yes.
Rees, I'd like to call for a division.
Certainly. So all those in favour again, please. Councillor Fuller, Councillor Fitzpatrick, Councillor Bussell, Councillor Benton and Councillor Rees. And all those against, Councillor Herry and Councillor Grant. Thank you. The recommendation is carried, and we'll move on to, thank you, Celeste, to 15.2, Draft Roadside Conservation Management Plan 2021.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The draft Roadside Conservation Management Plan 2021 is presented to Council with the aim to endorse the draft plan to go out for community consultation for a period of 60 days. There is a wide range of legislation relating to native vegetation protection and protection of existing services and safety when working in the road reserve. The draft Roadside Conservation Management Plan aims to assist roadside users to understand vegetation values, applicable legislation and suitable methods to reduce risks when working on roadsides. Council officers have reviewed the current plan and have made updates where applicable and feel that it's now ready to come before Council. The recommendation is that Council endorse the draft Roadside Management Plan to go out for a 60-day public exhibition period, inviting submissions from the community and stakeholders until close of business on Friday the 21st of January 2022, reviews and considers adopting the Roadside Conservation Management Plan at the March 22 Council meeting and taking into consideration all submissions made. If no submissions are come forward requesting changes to the Roadside Conservation Management Plan, Council adopts the plan without further resolution. I would do like to note on this, on the original published agenda, there was an error in that last sentence that noted Mirawal Park Master Plan instead of the Roadside Conservation Management Plan. It has subsequently been amended as to what you see on the screen.
Thank you, Acting Director. Any questions from the gallery on this recommendation? No. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Benton and Councillor Herry to second it. Councillor Benton, anything to report?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I just urge constituents to be able to analyse this plan, particularly in the rural area. It probably doesn't affect the urban areas as much, but it has recommendable guidelines and stuff for the urban area. I would say this roadside vegetation would be one of the most talked about topics that I have in my constituents, and I think there's an opportunity now to make sure what they desire, what they want, if it can fit in with what we are trying to do here. Please put your submissions in so we can analyse them and see whether we can accommodate them. That's what I just urge everybody, Mr Mayor, that have got some concerns and are not whether, and I know it is the same in the southern ward as well, and the Warby ward. I've had plenty of conversations with people in and around roadside vegetation so we can get this thing that will work properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Benton. Councillor Bussell.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. As a rural councillor, I normally travel between 30 and 50,000 k's a year around the rural roads, and there's many parts that we don't manage very well at all, and particularly on a year like this year where it's lovely season, grass is 2 metres high at the moment, and I don't have an answer for everything here, but I urge my constituents to have some input here, because this is my number one topic as a councillor. It's most of my time is spent on issues on roadsides, and the fire risk, just one, and the wild animals is the other one. I just urge people to have some input, and I'd be grateful to see what everybody thinks. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Herry.
Thank you, Mayor Rees. Indeed, roadside conservation is complex. Get my tongue around it. There are numerous pieces of legislation that are impacting this policy. It's really heavily based in legislation, and there are a lot of different players involved with a stake in the game, including community members, not just various council and various government players. Yeah, you can get roads with grasses that are 2 metres high. They're probably the roads that don't have a lot of other vegetation, and there's a lot of different levels of classification of our roadsides. But weeds and management of those grasses, it can take a lot of effort, and it can pose a really significant grass fire risk, we have to remember there are lots of different fire risks, and fire risk in general is a hot topic in roadside conservation. But it's not just fire and weeds, it's grazing and I guess recreation or the amenity it provides, and firewood is another thing that would be on people's minds, perhaps with respect to roadsides. But there's also, of course, the ecological services that the environment does provide to us, and our roadsides can be pretty key places where a lot of that vegetation, not unlike the one considered in the previous item, like remnant vegetation, significant mature trees can be reserved because there's not a lot of habitat for that sort of thing left, arguably, compared to a long time ago. So it's really easy to forget about these services because they're not necessarily providing a direct benefit, but you come back to 2 metre long grass and you bring into the discussion or conversation, I guess, the concept of you don't get 2 metre long grass necessarily under big trees or under canopy cover, more heavy canopy cover. And yes, it can introduce different management considerations and different risks, but it really needs to be weighed up holistically, and everyone definitely does need to have conversations and try and work together and put all the complex pieces together so we can really try and get the best outcomes, not just a black and white, unilateral sort of thinking. So definitely encourage community input and look forward to seeing this one back in front of us again.
Thanks, Councillor Herring. Any other councillors? Councillor Grant, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Like Councillor Bussell and also Councillor Benton, roadside management is a particular issue in my ward as well, and it's one that if people are disenchanted, it's usually around the way that roadsides are managed. You know, whether for conservation or whether they're just management in general. So I would welcome people to provide feedback, and certainly in my ward, because I think there are some particular issues that need addressing and need to be considered in the way we move the plan forward. So, getting people to put in a submission, I think, would be most important.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. No other councillors? Councillor Benton, anything to finish off as the mover?
Oh, I'd just reiterate again to put in, and I'd even ask for the department, some of those departments, to start putting some of these, because some of these actors have been outlined by Councillor Herry, comes from other departments, and in the document it just says refer to a lot of other documents and departments, and they become log jams after a while in relationship to what we can and can't do. So just urge people to read it and get their thoughts on paper, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Benton. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? And the recommendation is carried. Thank you. We'll move down through Acting Director Celeste. Thank you. We'll move down to item 16, Special Committee reports. There's none. 17, Advisory Committee reports, no. But 18 is the minutes of Advisory Committee meetings. 18.1, record of Advisory Committee minutes. I'll hand over to CEO McGrath.
Thanks, Mayor Rees. We have a number of sets of minutes from various advisory committees over the course of several months, and they are there for Council's noting.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the gallery? No. Could I please have a mover? Councillor Fitzpatrick, Councillor Fuller to second. Would any councillor like to talk on the recommendation? No. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. All those in favour accepting, the recommendation is carried. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll move down to, there's no notice of motion, urgent business, but public question time there is. Before I go to the gallery here for public question time, I will just read a couple of questions that came in via our system here and ask for an answer here. So the first one is from a Mick O'Keefe. Can Council and or Infrastructure Services please confirm what flood mitigation works are proposed for the Old School Road subdivision, including confirmation of A, where the levee will be constructed, B, whether existing drainage lines will be cleaned out, including the easement on 24 Furbank Drive, and C, any works to increase the stormwater discharge capacity under or over Old School Road. I'll look to Director Goonan as Director for Infrastructure there to help in the answer of that question.
Thank you, Mayor Rees. I can confirm that the works will include the installation of a levee, some drain clearing, culvert installation and road lowering on Old School Road. The levee will be constructed on the existing council easement running from Old School Road towards Furbank Drive. The existing drainage line between 24 and 34 Furbank Drive will be regraded and cleaned out, and additional works to increase the capacity over or under Old School Road will include road lowering and the installation of additional culverts.
Thanks, Director Goonan. I think that answers that fine. I'll go on to another question, question number 2, which is from Joanne Griffiths. Given councillors committed $443,771 of ratepayer funds to design a proposed viewing tower within the Ned Kelly Siege area known as the Glenrowan Heritage Precinct H2000, my question to council is, or are, there's 2 questions, and I'll do question A first and then go to question B. I'll get A and get the answer. Why is a viewing tower needed when those interested in the siege site can see everything by walking a few minutes rather than spend this on dangerous footpaths and hazardous potholes in Wangaratta?
Thanks to Joanne for the question. The answer is this is a nationally or arguably internationally significant site. We think building something special does justice to that story. This will be much more than a big tall thing to stand on and look out of. There will be lots of interpretation, lots of storytelling, lots of information about the history of that site, as well as virtual and augmented reality experiences for people to come and see and view the story firsthand. So it's much more than just a big place to come and look from.
Thank you, CEO. Question B, have any cost variations been allowed by council to the designer? If so, how much extra has been allowed and for what reason?
No and zero.
Right, question is answered. Thank you.
Excuse me.
Thank you, John. Yes.
Mayor Rees, sorry to jump in there. Yeah, I just wanted to also, I guess, add to that response a little bit. But
sure.
Our contribution was greatly outweighed by the grants opportunity and funding coming from other sources at a really favourable rate. So the roughly $500,000, our contribution secured $3.5 million of
correct
state
government funding.
Yeah, government funding. And just with respect to any change to costs, I mean, just to note that cost escalations have been occurring, I guess, and none are locked in yet, but of course we'll anticipate that and deal with it as and when is necessary. So just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you. But Brendan has answered the question as asked by Joanne, so appreciate that. Now, public question time from the gallery. Are there any questions from the gallery? If so, it needs to be a question. You have a maximum of 2 questions per person. Would anybody like to ask a question? Mr. Fox, please step forward again.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to bring up the subject of the King George Gardens and Maloney's Arcade. They are linked because they are both in the CBD. The King George Gardens are underutilised because of the restricted access. I believe the gate in Ovens Street that is opposite the walkway should be got rid of and made about 2 or 3 to the opening, made 2 or 3 times wider. And then further along, the fence that I asked Alan Clark why did he put it there, he told me that he consulted a focus group. So when I delved into who's the focus group, he said it was the garden club. Well, the garden club wanted the fence so people wouldn't walk on the garden. So now, Mr. Mayor, hang on. Now, Mr. Mayor, what I'm looking for, and forget about the motor traffic in Maloney's Arcade, I would like you to remove the seats out of Maloney's Arcade and put them in the King George Gardens. There are not enough seats in the gardens, and there are too many seats in Maloney's Arcade. You now, as a pedestrian, if you're coming one way or the other and both of the ladies have got a pram and a little one by side, they've got to stop and walk aside so the other one can get past. And the seats aren't being used. Now, I know if you wait long enough, you'll find 6 people and you'll be able to photograph it. But that is not the norm. The norm is the seats are vacant. So I'm asking you as councillors to seriously consider moving the seats to the King George Gardens and opening up opening up the King George Gardens for more seating and family use. That's the finish of my first question.
Thank you, Mr. Fox, for the question. We could certainly have a look at putting more seats into King George Gardens, but are you saying that King George Garden isn't being utilised? So what's the point in putting more seats in? With Maloney's Arcade, I'm very happy with the seating arrangements in Maloney's Arcade, as I eat there on numerous occasions for that publicity. Any other councillors got any thoughts on the seats in Maloney's Arcade? Would you like to change the status quo? Are you quite happy? Councillor Grant, I'd like to hear.
Oh, look, I don't have a really strong opinion about Maloney's Arcade. I have seen people sit there and, it's one of those things that, people get used to the fact that it's there and, they will use it. But to talk about King George Gardens, I think the idea of having, a gate and a fence is also to, when you've got a family and you've got children, there's an opportunity of, enjoying the ambience of the gardens without having to worry about the kids running out onto the street, and you kind of know where they are. So, my idea of the King George Gardens, and perhaps to have more seating might not necessarily be a good idea either, because, there are some, fairly substantial trees there that mightn't benefit from having, seats put in the place. So my view is King George Gardens are looking pretty nice, and I would keep them as they are.
Thank you.
And, maybe, King George, the Maloney's Arcade is, possibly a work in progress, and we could be looking at that into the future, see how it's used.
Thanks, Councillor. Sure.
Councillor Herry.
Sorry to jump in there, Mr. Fox. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just respond to that first couple of items there. With respect to Maloney's Arcade, I'm absolutely open to just reviewing the utilisation. I have seen people in there using the seats, but there could be ways of facilitating and making it more amenable, and we absolutely could look at doing that, definitely. With respect to the gates to King George Gardens, I have noticed sometimes it's a double gate and sometimes one of the gates is closed. It can be opened, I believe, but for some reason one of the gates is closed, the other's open. So it can make for a quite narrow constriction of people going in and out there. I'm not sure if we could look at the situation of why the gates are half open, half closed occasionally. I'll have another look myself next time I'm down there. But with respect to seating, perhaps we could also look at the situation there and a couple more seats. It is a very well utilised park in the CBD for people going for lunch, and there have been times when I've gone down and most of the seats have been fairly full up. So absolutely up for considering that. That's all for the first part. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Herry. Any other councillor? Councillor Fuller?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Brian, you may remember earlier in our first term that we actually reviewed the layout of the King George Gardens. We installed some more seating, and that was the opportunity for more seating that you could have contributed to, and I don't believe you did contribute to the seating situation in King George Gardens at that point.
Thank you very much. People are very much like sheep, councillors. Try driving a mob of sheep through a narrow gateway and see how you get on. And people wander just the same way. You open the gate and more people come. I finish with my question and I thank you for your patience.
Thank you. Your second question, Mr. Fox?
Yes, I do.
Yes, please.
At a recent council meeting, I asked who were the negotiators with the railways. Now, don't pin me down to the exact name, who we're talking to. I don't know. I just know that you told me that you and the Mayor and the CEO were the negotiators negotiating with the railways over how we're going to get the population from one side of the road to the other. And this is the pedestrian population, the elderly people like me on a scooter, the cyclist, how are we going to get them across? I think the biggest disaster is the design that we've seen in the paper, which is the tunnel. I will guarantee you, I'll give you $5 after it's been finished 3 months for every person who walks under that tunnel and walks back out again. They won't do it. They'll get in their car and they'll drive around. So, gentlemen, what I'm asking you, you might find this a bit hard, I want a copy of the minutes of the meetings between you two gentlemen and the railways. Otherwise, I'm barking behind the tree. So, gentlemen, that's what I would like. Thank you.
Our meetings with ARTC are etc. to address the issues that they have on tunnels or bridges and etc. So we put cases forward on different ones. We're still waiting on them. Is that correct, Marcus? Are we still waiting on them to come back with the...
We are still waiting on a final design.
On a final design, so we haven't seen that as of yet before it comes back to us for us then to talk to ARTC.
Mr Mayor, may I say to you, with the deepest respect to the engineer, that he's the wrong guy to ask the question to.
He's the exact right guy to ask the question to, Mr Fox, absolutely.
Mr Mayor, we are talking about construction when we talk to Marcus. Go down the hospital, go down the school, ask the people how they want to get across through the line. It's the people movement. And it's not an engineering question.
It's an ARTC job. ARTC are doing the community consultation on this issue and they're the ones asking the question. So you're most welcome to call our ARTC and talk to them. Councillor Fuller.
I believe Marcus actually now holds part of the portfolio from Jamie, which therefore does equate him to community wellbeing, sport, recreation, etc. So he is still engineer or not engineer, the right person to ask. Yes, Mr Mayor?
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Councillor Herry?
Thank you, Mayor Rees, and thank you, Mr Fox, for your question. Yeah, we still are pending absolute final design on that one, and ARTC, it is their project, and they are conducting the community engagement and consultation. However, we definitely do have a part in advocating for ensuring the best outcomes for our community. So definitely in no way want to abrogate that responsibility.
Thank you. Councillor Benton?
Yeah, I'm not going to ask the question. I'm going to make a statement in relationship to people going under tunnels and whatever. I see in Wangaratta, since I've moved in here, the most popular thing we've got here is the walking tracks. And they go under bridges. They go under the Wangaratta Road Bridge. They go under the... And I often wonder what... You know, we've had no instances. I can't recall of any instances of anyone being attacked, walking out of them, fearful to go across them. I have had, and very recently, a petition come in around about a bridge that was across one of the creek that we had to address. So So if we start doing that, and I've got family at Pakenham, I've had a look at the tunnel down there, which is one of the ones we've been shown. It's well lit, it's you can see right through. I find the rhetoric that's going on is becoming a little bit theatrical in relationship to the reasoning for not wanting to have a tunnel under the underpass. And I'm starting to get to your vintage, Mr. Fox, and I know very well I wouldn't like to be climbing up blooming stairs and ramps all the damn time when I can walk underneath the tunnel going, it'll be a far easier episode. But it still amazes me the amount of hesitancy, and yet you'll see some of the most people running around town running under bridges.
Councillor Benton, I agree wholeheartedly. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. No, Mr. Fox, that's your time, but thank you for your questions. Any other questions from the gallery tonight? Please, Mr. Bridges. Please state your name, John, and...
Yes, John Bridges from the Moyu Action Group. If I can just seek a bit of indulgence, I'd like to acknowledge the Council's work in relation to the hall at Moyu. I'm particularly impressed by the action, bearing in mind the petition was just lodged a few weeks ago and money's been allocated to it. I find that a stunning response, so thank you for that. My question, however, relates to some shock horror, bike tracks for me. Is the Council committed to building a bike track from Oxley to Cheshunt as set out in the work done by Tourism North East recently? And if so, what action are they taking? Are they going to generate to ensure that this total project is achieved?
Thanks, John. Good question. Brendan, would you like to?
Sure. Thanks, Mayor Rees. John, firstly, in terms of just setting expectations around the hall, what happened tonight wasn't actually the allocation of funding. It was a resolution by council that a project bid be prepared for next year. So let's just, as much as we're grateful for your thanks, we do need to wait and go through next year's budget process and let the councillors determine whether that bid actually finds its way into the budget. But this is a very positive start, I agree. On the Prosecco Road master plan, the council has endorsed that work. It didn't exclude any piece of work from that when it endorsed it. You know, sometimes governments accept 39 recommendations and reject 11 of them. That didn't happen. We endorsed it in full. We have now that work is one of our main 12 advocacy priorities, and we're meeting with the team from RDV on Friday, for example, to talk through all of those priorities, and we will continue to prosecute those priorities to various people within government. The Prosecco Road Master Plan obviously sets out a pretty wide range of priorities, and you know there is a kind of rough order of, you know, high, medium, low, etc. And I can't tell you exactly where that rail trail sits in amongst all that. I'm pretty sure the priorities establish stages of that, you know, some being built before others. I couldn't tell you in which order they're in.
Yep. Could I, in that case, Brendan, could I suggest that as this project slowly moves forward, that some extensive community consultation take place, because there are some interesting challenges out there. There are some dead simple sections, and they're pretty obvious, but we look forward to it happening, and you can rest assured that the action group will be regularly following it up. So thank you.
Just as a final thing, sorry,
Sure.
we did Councillor Bussell, the Mayor and I and several other officers did meet with a range of people in Whitfield only a couple of weeks ago now, Councillor Bussell, and there was certainly strong interest in that plan, and we certainly committed to that group that for each of the projects as they were mobilised there would be separate consultation for each of those pieces of work. So that is clearly something we do intend to do.
Another thing I'd like to stress is that that I'd like to see the project be done as a whole rather than. I understand it being constructed in sections, but I'd like to see that when the people go to get this funded, the funding for the total project is guaranteed by government, rather than doing a section and getting the funding for that, then seeking the funding, so on, and section by section. Because it would be too easy to do a section around Cheshunt Whitfield, and then for a lot of the businesses in the Cheshunt Whitfield area that would lose interest in the rest of the trail. Just a point. Thank you.
Thank you, John. There's no further questions from the gallery.
I would if you'd allow me.
Well, that won't be happening today, sir. To our acting director, thank you. Sarah, thank you. Marcus, thank you. Councillor Grant, always a pleasure working with you. Councillor Herry, great to have you on board. Yes. And Councillor Benton, even though, yes, definitely love having you here. CEO McGrath, thank you. Correct. Councillor Buswell, Deputy Mayor, again, thank you for supporting me and being beside me. Councillor Fitzpatrick, always a great support of mine. So thank you for your great conversations, etc. Councillor Fuller, me buddy. Thanks, mate. Good to have you on board too. Planning Director up the back there, thank you, Claire, for being here to help out if needed. Appreciate your presence. To the gallery, thank you. To the great girls up the back, fantastic job as always. And to the lady in pink, great having you here, brightening up our world. Thank you. So thanks, Beck. And I'll officially declare our council meeting closed. Thank you and have a great night.